Today, we are, of course, talking about from plan to progress, navigating security system plans for CMMC readiness. And of course, CMMC stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. That is the cybersecurity certification through the U.S. Department of Defense. And that is one of the big things that Project Spectrum is responsible to help out with. So I want to make sure that you understand that and what we're going to be talking about today. So here are your speakers for today. We are looking at Dr. Dwayne Hodges, who has told me that I can just call him Dwayne, which I am greatly appreciative of. Highly accomplished cybersecurity leader. He has more than 30 years of combined military and industry experience. You can read the rest on the screen, but again, he's got a great pedigree. We are thrilled to have him today as our guest on Cyber Circuits, where we're going to be talking about this topic. And then, of course, you get to see me, and I am the strategic communications lead for a nonprofit organization known as Move America. Move America is a nonprofit that works closely with industry, government, and academia, particularly with the U.S. Department of Defense, where Move America is the intermediary for the DoD's Mentor Protege program. So if you want to learn more about the Mentor Protege program, please feel free to reach out to me. The email that you can get me at is listed right there, communications@moveamerica.org. So we're going to make sure that you get the opportunity to learn more about that. But again, we are your speakers for today, and I will let Dwayne talk a little bit more about his background in just a moment. Before I get started, do want to give the little commercial, as we like to call it, for Project Spectrum and let you know just exactly what Project Spectrum is here to do. Project Spectrum started a few years ago by the U.S. Department of Defense, and really what it's meant to do is it's meant to help bolster cybersecurity within the defense industrial base. But Project Spectrum is so much more because it can be used by any company, regardless of size, small, medium, large. It can be used by companies by organizations in any type of industry. It could be a manufacturing company, could be a company that provides services or consulting, or it could be a government agency. It could be an academic institution. Cybersecurity is not just limited to the industrial base. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that and understands that Project Spectrum does offer a lot of tools, training, and resources. So you can see those here where we have templates for security system plans, which of course is our topic of today. Also plans of action and milestones, one-on-one cyber advisory services. We have a self-assessment toolkit. We have a cyber readiness dashboard. We have where we can help you with your SPUR score generation. That's the supplier performance and I forget what the R is for, but it's basically where you upload your cybersecurity score so that you can do business with the Department of Defense and the federal government. And then we also have templates for remediation plans. And then we've got cybersecurity training and education, blogs, cybersecurity news items, Project Spectrum briefings like this one. And we invite you at all times to make sure that you are registered for Project Spectrum. It costs you nothing to register. It costs you nothing to utilize Project Spectrum's resources. They are all provided for you at no cost to the user. They are free of charge to you. We are endorsed and we are backed by the U.S. Department of Defense Office of Small Business Programs. And so that is where we make sure that they are paying the bills so that you get access to all of this great information. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen for right now, and I am going to introduce to you Dwayne Hodges, who is our guest speaker for today. Dwayne, go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks on the line and let them know about your background and what we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. Thanks for that, Rick. So as Rick indicated, I served about 20 years in the military, so I'm a retired Army cybersecurity officer. I did a lot of network defense team lead, information assurance, and for those of you guys that are familiar with DIACAP, I was heavily involved with DIACAP and DISCAP while in military uniform. So over the last 30 years, I've done a lot of accreditations for NSA systems, top secret systems, specifically with technology stacks sitting on military equipment in the battlefield. So I've been responsible for being able to inventory everything from the RPM packets all the way to the physical security of the environment of the system and go back and report to the DAO NSA on the status of that. In parallel to that, I've been teaching for about 20 years. So I am a college professor. I teach for more than one university, to include developing courses. In fact, I'm developing some courses right now for Wake Forest University in advanced cybersecurity practices. And I sit on a few industry IT boards throughout the United States. One Strayer IT industry board. I sit on FIT right here in Florida. And I've also sat with George Washington University, Norfolk State University, and some other small colleges throughout the United States. But I think for today, I'd like to share that I have been involved with CMMC for the last 5 years. So I started out as a provisional assessor with the Cyber AB. I'm now a lead CCA. I've spent the last 5 years doing self-assessments on a lot of companies within manufacturing. I helped AT&T Cybersecurity build their first CMC program, and I have led as a CCA a couple assessments since the final rule. Some I have passed, and some that I have not even approved to go to the assessment. So I think with that, we can transition into what we're going to talk about today, and some of the lessons learned and things that I would look at as an assessor. So a lot of things that I'll talk about will be how I view it through the lens of an assessor, and how I think the OSC should avoid some of the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen so far within the defense industrial base.
And that's fantastic, Dwayne. And so, the first question I'm going to ask you right off the bat, because a lot of businesses have asked this over the years, why is CMMC such a big deal for businesses that want to work with DoD? I mean, because a lot of businesses, they were all into NIST. Everybody, NIST 800-171. There are the other NIST special publications. And so why is it that CMMC is now such a big deal for anybody who wants to do business with DoD?
Yeah, that's a good question, Rick. So a little history on that, right? So in 2016, the Department of Defense came out with a requirement called the DFARS rule in 2016, and it basically required contractors in the defense industrial base that are either receiving, storing, or creating CUI on behalf of the DoD in performance of a contract, or they received the CUI, they had to implement adequate security, and that adequate security is defined in NIST Special Publication 800-171. So that was in place for a while. Three things that you had to do as a contractor. You had to have a system security plan to document how you implemented those controls. You had to report an annual self-attestation in SPRS every year. And you had to, most importantly, have a poem in place for those controls that were not in place, and within that timeline showing that you've made progression towards fixing those control items that weren't in place. But it was only after a few years later, when the Department of Defense was still seeing a high rise in attacks coming through, and they had an IG inspection, and the IG concluded that, hey, this self-attestation from our contractors is not working. Companies that are saying that they are perfect are less than perfect. Companies that are saying that they have a score of 95 and they have a poem in place and they're going to fix these control problems, they never fixed it, but they were still reporting that they were doing well. And so DoD, by and large, believes that a reason why a lot of their data is scattered around the world is because their contractors throughout the supply ecosystem are not properly implementing cybersecurity practices. So that was a 7012 clause. So CMMC basically comes around and it says, listen, we no longer believe in you. Okay, in order to do business, you're going to have to get a third-party assessor come and assess what you say you're doing, and somebody's going to have to validate and verify from an external standpoint that you're doing what you need to be doing. And so why is this important? Well, because it's going to be a requirement for DoD contracts going forward. Right now, we're still in a honeymoon phase of the final rule rollout. When we get to phase 4, which I expect to be towards the end of this year, early 2026, this is going to be the price of doing business with the Department of Defense. Okay, they're going to be requiring that you have this certification in place, that you've implemented your controls, that you do an annual assessment, and you have a system security plan that documents what you've done. And they feel that this is the heartbeat of protecting your intellectual property, but also sensitive information that you're doing in performance with a contract that they don't believe you have the right to share with other parties. The other part with the CMMC rule is that it moves beyond just you need to get a self a C3PO to come certify you, right? They're looking to standardize cybersecurity practices. So they want to move beyond the self-attestation. So where in the last 5 or 6 years, company could say, this is my score, this is what they have. They want to get past that. They want to get with somebody that's approved can say whether you're good to go. They also want to clear expectations. There's a lot of myth busters, and I think the town hall talks about this every single month in the town hall meeting. There's a lot of myth busters that have taken place over the last 5 or 6 years of what CMMC is, what CMC is not, what cybersecurity requirements are, whether you can implement MFA. So they want to clear that up, and they want to define this is what good looks like, this is what bad looks like, and we encourage that you get trained on it rather than make your assumptions based off of a cybersecurity program that is not revolved around 800-171. I think that the fourth thing that they're looking for with CMMC is trust and credibility. Right now, the DoD doesn't trust a lot of their contractors, and they're not credible. So the SPRS scores over the last 5 years, they say what you say, but they really don't bring a lot of trust and credibility. And again, that creeps back to the rise of ongoing attacks within the defense industrial base, and especially with the large primes. And then the fifth thing that they want to do is they want to make sure that they continue to drive cybersecurity improvements. So the tech stacks change as Microsoft sends out updates, as our vendors hold us hostage, we got to continue to improve our cybersecurity controls. And so I think those are the big 5 areas that we're looking at. You know, a DoD contract, standardizing the practices, building trust and credibility with our customer, which is DoD, and then being able to drive cybersecurity improvements on an ongoing basis through continuous monitoring.
Excellent. I want to take a real quick moment and give a great shout out to Maureen Miller, who let me know that the R in SPRS or SPRS is for risk. Cannot believe I missed a word that small, but this is what happens when you're on only your first cup of coffee of the day. As a military person, Dwayne, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a 3-cup minimum in order for the brain sometimes to start working. So thank you, Maureen. But Dwayne, thank you for sharing all of that. And I have to say, so with all of that said, that trust issue is a big thing, and making sure that you're protecting yourself, you're protecting others, you're protecting your own intellectual property, because a lot of people don't realize just how important that is and how valuable that information is to threat actors all around the world, both, domestically and internationally. When it comes to CMMC, even with the self-attestation, there's still a lot of preparedness that needs to happen. There's a lot of preparation that needs to go into getting yourself into the position to be able to say that, yes, you meet the requirements for CMMC level 1, which is, again, all self-attestation, or CMMC level 2 if you're on the 1 split where you only need to self-attest every year. What are some of the consequences that some of these businesses are going to face if they don't go through all of the steps in order to get prepared to reach that level?
So, this is a marathon, right? If you're starting out with the greenfield network, if you've never done, if you don't have a contract right now with CUI and you want to go after a contract and you want to be prepared to do business with DoD, I see that a lot of companies right now are running to write an SSP, which is the heartbeat. We need an SSP. This is our policy, documents what we do. But most importantly, there's a lot of sub steps that before you get to the system security plan. And I teach RMF, and I say it's a lot like RMF, right? So there's a lot of preparation that I think that needs to be done into this. There's some key documents that I think that some companies just simply haven't looked at. FIPS 199. And FIPS 200. What are my security families, and what is the impact level for it? So being able to take those documents and being able to categorize your information that you have, being able to scope it out for the processes, the people, the applications, and being able to define what your boundary looks like and what's in scope. Where is your CUI data? Because this is about the data, right? We're not assessing a facility. We're not assessing people. We're assessing where your data is at, that enclave that it's in. And so there's a lot of legwork that has to get done to be able to just pull that information forward from your environment, your hardware listen, your software listen. The data is important because, to your point, what I see a lot of companies doing is they just want to classify everything. Well, that's what we were doing with sensitive but unclassified information. That was why the executive order took us to CUI, because we wanted to control what is CUI and what is not. So if you can't get inside your data and bifurcate what you're responsible for to protect as intellectual property versus what you're creating on behalf of the government, or what the government's given to you in performance of a contract, you're not going to be able to effectively write a system security plan. You're not going to be able to effectively, at a cost advantage to yourself, put in those controls that need to be put in place. And when you get to an assessment, an assessor is going to look at how you scope your processes, how you scope your facility, how you scoped your data. They're going to look at all that. And if you haven't scoped it properly, it's going to put you back to square one, or it's going to be a very costly assessment for you.
And so all of that data, all of that information, I'm guessing that's exactly what would go into a system security plan. Because I have to say that a lot of people hear that system security plan and they immediately, start thinking about, books upon books upon books of documentation. So can you explain to folks sort of on the 35,000-foot level, what exactly is involved in putting together a system security plan, what's involved, and particularly why it's important to make sure that you're documenting that? Because I think that's the other thing a lot of people think. They think that an SSP is one of those nice to haves rather than a must have.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, your system security plan is your policy document. In the commercial world, I've seen companies that have 300-page policies, and they cover all the security families that they want to require. I saw this pretty heavily doing some consulting in insurance companies. But your system security plan, I think there are some key takeaways that we should understand about the security plan. It needs to be your blueprint for security, right? It needs to be a foundational document that details how you implement those 110 controls in 800-171 to meet your specific requirements, right? So you can think of your system security plan as a comprehensive how-to-do guide for your security posture. The second thing about the system security plan, it's a living document, right? So this is not a one-time deliverable. You got to be reviewing this regularly, updating it, and maintaining changes that will reflect changes within your system and your environment, but most importantly, your threat landscape, right? So what you publish today may be very different next week if you have technology change, or if there's a cascading effect in software, vulnerabilities come out. Big things with SSPs that I see wrong is a lot of vague language, right? While the SSP is a high-level document, being specific is very critical. So the SSP needs to clearly describe the specific implementation for each control within your unique environment, and that has to be followed with some objective evidence. And I've said this time and time again for many years. I mean, we use SSPs for FedRAMP, we use SSPs for the military. But if you don't have objective evidence, an administrative control where you have proof that you're following it, or a technical control that you can show, then you shouldn't be putting it in your system security plan. Another big takeaway for the system security plan is traceability really matters, right? So for each control that is in the SSP, it needs to be clearly linked back to a specific requirement that addresses. It doesn't necessarily need to be on a separate document in the beginning, but you do want to have a security requirements traceability matrix that you can show along with your SSP that says, hey, listen, I have 15 people in my company. Okay, out of these 15 people, Dwayne and Rick are responsible for these controls. And that has to be clearly documented in the SSP. You can't just put a role specific. You got to be able to assign somebody to own that control. And this is especially important if you're using MSSP services, cloud service providers. If you have any kind of external service provider that is implementing or maintaining that control, that needs to be clearly documented. Although it's inherited, it doesn't relieve you as a responsibility to maintain oversight of it. The SSP is also a communications tool, right? It serves as the vital communication for your internal teams, your management, and external assessors. The assessments that I've done since the final rule, the first thing I look at in the pre-assessment activities, I want a system security plan. I'm looking for that system security plan, and I'm looking to see if the body of evidence is intact. If you don't have a system security plan, or you have one that's in draft format, you haven't clearly documented why you feel some of your controls are not applicable, uh, we can't even move to the assessment part. When I was at AT&T for 3 years, we built this program. We put a lot of work in the SSP, and we really socialized it around the organization, because AT&T is a huge organization, and we were inheriting controls from parts of the business that we didn't know existed. But it was really important to socialize that SSP with all the control owners and all the management, because when an assessor comes in, an assessor is going to look at that control, and they're going to want to reach out and speak to the individual that is responsible for that control. So the SSP itself has to be your center of gravity for communication and documentation. Now, that's not to say that we won't have other policies. I also recommend a security policy for every family to kind of get into the weeds on how we're going to implement that control. But everything has to start with the SSP. The next thing I would say, Rick, is that the SSP has to be it has to offer you a roadmap for remediation. An output of the SSP should be a poem. Okay, anywhere we don't have controls in place, okay, that needs to be well documented on your plan of action and milestone. How are you going to fix it? What's the problem? Who's responsible for it? What is the risk associated with it? And when are you going to get it done by? And so this will outline in your SSP, you will mark either you're applicable, not applicable, or you have a poem, and that document should be able to translate to exactly what's missing for the control implementation on the SSP. And it's an inspectable artifact. I mean, you have to have a date attached to that for the SPRS score as well. Big thing with poems and SSPs, when you start putting stuff on these poems, they need to be action oriented, right? So you got to be able to focus on what will be done, who's going to be doing it, and when will they be remediated. And this allows you to prioritize because you won't be able to fix everything.
Well, and I'm so glad that you brought up a poem, because I have to say that there are a lot of people that, have a little bit of inconsistency when thinking about the difference between an SSP and a poem, because I know that just from previous Project Spectrum trainings that we've done, we've had businesses that say, well, how are they different? Shouldn't my SSP include my poem, or vice versa? And so, obviously, like you said, the SSP should sort of lead down the path to a poem. Is that how you put it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when I look at a poem and I see that a control is not implemented, a control is not met, the next document that I'm going to look for is a poem, because part of your contract performance, DFARS requirements having nothing to do with CMMC, is if one of those controls are not in place, it has to be documented on a poem, and that poem clock starts 180 days as soon as you document it. If you haven't documented, and so you want to talk about trust and credibility, having a poem and having an intact SSP shows DoD that you're serious about security, and you know what it takes to fix and remediate the problems that you've had. You're learning this through continuation monitoring. And you're right, there are some. So the poem goes a little bit step further, right? So there are some key principles that I look for. Although the final rule allows you to be very liberal on your template poem and your SSP template, there are some common sense factors that I would look for in a poem, right? So I look for clear and concise. Is it straightforward, or do I have to talk to the engineer to understand what exactly we're talking about? Again, I'm looking for something that's action oriented. I want to see specific actions that will be taken to remediate the control that you say is not in place. It has to be measurable, right? So those milestones, okay, should be quantifiable so we can track them on a project. So I can see that clock, and I can see how many days we have left before we need to close out this poem. There has to be accountability on the poem. So the system security plan may document who's responsible for the control, okay, but who's responsible for mediation may involve 2 or 3 teams. It may involve one person. So clearly assigning a responsible person for each action item on a poem is important. And then being realism, right? If you can set achievable timelines so you can allocate the right resources on that poem, is the way you're going to turn it into a project plan. If it's something like a corrective action plan or a limited deficiency, if there's something you can fix on the fly, you just did a vulnerability scanning on Monday, and our remediations, our change management windows on Friday, that's different, right? the other principle here is just like the SSP, the poem is a living, breathing document, right? So it needs to be regularly reviewed and updated. The poem date doesn't change, but you can keep adding items onto the poem and just resolve them. But you shouldn't be going back and deleting the poem items at all. You're tracking this as a matter of record of all the controls that were not in place and how you addressed it. And that's how you're showing DoD that you have a security program that acknowledges deficiencies and fixes them in a timely manner.
And then when you were talking about the controls, now are those controls related to the the different families within CMMC level 1, like access control and identification and authentication? Is that what you're talking about when you're talking about those controls? You're talking about those specific objectives. I think there's 17 for level 1. Level 2, it jumps up a whole lot more. Is that what you're referring to when you're talking about controls?
Yeah, and just to add a little fidelity to that, right? So there are 14 security families, there are 110 controls, and there are 320 assessment objectives. So for each control, access control, for example, is the first family. There's 22 controls and 70 assessment objectives in that family. And so for every single control, there are several assessment objectives that have to be met for the control to be met. The interesting thing about the FAR maturity level 1, which is 15 safeguards. Those 15 safeguards are in fact controls out of 800-171. For the purpose of the FAR clause, they are safeguards that have to be implemented for federal contract information. But when you get to maturity level 2, the controls are still there. They're just we're just adding additional assessment objectives that would not normally be audited for FCI. But in all cases, maturity level 1 has 6 security families. So we have access control, we have auditing, we have media protection, we have some from physical environment, we have the SI family and the SC family. So there's 6 security families right there for maturity level 1, and then there's 14 total for maturity level 2. And all those controls come directly out of 800-171 Rev 2.
Excellent. And because that's a really big thing that people need to understand. It's when you're developing a security system plan, if you are only going for CMMC level 1 certification, you have the certain things that you need to focus on. If you're going for level 2, there are obviously more. So would it be safe to say that your SSP, the amount of information that's going to go into it is going to be directly correlated to the level you want to get? So if you only want to go to level 1, you're obviously not going to need to address everything that would be in level 2.
Yeah, so that's a good point, and I want to kind of flesh that out. So the final rule as of December of last year, it allows for a lot of flexibility for documentation for level 1. It doesn't require you to have a system security plan, right? What I submit, if I had to give any feedback on the final rule, I'd say that was probably one of the biggest errors, right? Because if you don't document how you implement those controls, you're not going to be able to take that journey to maturity level 2 without having a lot of roadblockers. And so while the final rule doesn't require a system security plan or formal documentation for level 1, it's advisable. Any client that I'm working with, I'm going to highly advise that we document it in a system security plan format or system security policy so we can objectively look what we're doing. If you're not documenting what you're doing, Rick, and you're not using objective evidence to support your attestation, you're really putting yourself out there in the event if there's a breach, whether you're at maturity 1 or maturity 2. If they want to go back and say, well, tell me what you did here. If DOJ comes after you and says, well, you said that you were good to receive this FCI, and we sent you the information that we need to build this warship over here, and you replied back using Gmail. So the documentation piece, the short answer is yes. I highly recommend a system security plan for maturity level 1, especially if you have maturity level 2 on your journey, because what we're going to do is we're just going to take those 15 safeguards, those 6 security families that are already documented, and we're going to kind of cut it and paste it in your SSP for maturity level 2, and we're going to build upon what you've already done.
No, and that's fantastic to realize, because again, particularly businesses that are new to coming into federal contracting or doing business with DoD, you don't know what you don't know. And it's always a matter of, there are going to be pitfalls, and there are going to be, things that are going to happen along your journey. And we always try to remind people that it's a journey. Cybersecurity is not a destination, it's a journey, because just when you think you've got all of the answers, somebody goes and changes the questions. And so it's really a matter of, again, keeping that continual process going. So with that said, you've obviously helped organizations as they've been developing SSPs throughout the years. What would you say are some of the most common mistakes or pitfalls that businesses are going to hit as they're starting to develop an SSP?
Yeah. So what I see very often, what I've seen, even through my time in the military with DICAP up through RMF to CMMC, is I see a lot of lack of specificity and detail, right? So engineers and architects and administrators, they're very comfortable with saying, yeah, we do that. But it doesn't, I need to see how the sausage is made on the control. That's what I'm going to assess. I'm going to assess objectively, is it adequate and is it sufficient to support what you have in the SSP? I see inaccurate or outdated information. So everything needs to be within a 1 year time frame, right? So if I see artifacts or if I see documentation that's close to 12 months, I'm going to start pulling back on it because it doesn't tell me that you've done your due diligence and due care with the security continuous monitoring. In the CA family itself, it says that you have to continually monitor every control throughout the life cycle, as well as have a continuous monitoring plan. So if I see that you just got new artifacts or they're 11 months old, I'm going to start pulling back the covers a little bit. Incomplete coverage of requirements. So again, I said that there's 110 controls and 320 assessment objectives. So if you look at access control, it's the largest family, and you can't pick a control and say, I'm going to do this, this, and this. I use the analogy of a fishing boat, right? If I give you a fishing boat, it has 10 holes in it, and I plug 9 and say the boat's good to go, you're not going to want to go out and water on that boat. DoD is looking at this the same way with the security controls. All assessment objectives have to be met, and there's some risk associated with that, and I can talk about that in a little bit. But the other big thing is organizational structure. While the final rule doesn't have a specific format like FedRAMP, if you're doing FedRAMP, you got to go to the marketplace and use that format. You do want to pay attention to your contract and your agency that you're working with. They may have specific requirements that they expect in addition to the contract laws themselves. But having a very neat format that has been tried, tested, and worked is probably the best way to go. If you're starting out, if you're a novice, if you don't have a senior information security officer on your team, it's probably a good idea to get a template that's been used that will flow and give you all the information that you need, because there's more information that needs to go into this SSP than just 110 controls. You need to be able to define system boundaries. You need to be able to define internal external connections. So there's a lot of other goodies that we put in there. Your network diagrams, you want to be able to classify it. The final rule kind of tells you how to do it, but again, there's big documents out there that we default to, like FIPS 199, FIPS 200, NIST 800-60 allows us to pick the data that we're working on. So missing support and documentation reference is key. I hear a lot about 800-171 Rev 2. But if you look in 800-171 Rev 2, it will point back to a lot of authoritative sources. So if you're in the SI family or if you're in the SC family and you're looking at how to configure firewalls, you probably want to look at 800-40, the authoritative source for firewalls. NIST has a publication for just about every single control, subcontrol in 800-171. So you want to be familiar with that for your references. If you're referencing the CIS benchmarks, you're probably off to a bad start. Failure to define system boundaries, I see as a huge problem. I see some very colorful maps. Since my time of doing accreditation with the NSA, I've seen some really good operational view diagrams, but I've seen some very poor ones, right? And I think at this point, if I'm assessing you, I don't care if you use crayons, right? But I do want to see that you define your system boundary very clearly. I want to see where CUI is at and everything that's out of scope. And I want to see how data traverses east and west and north and south. So if you can define those, you're okay with a system boundary. I also see a lack of assigned responsibility. I realize that some companies are small to medium-sized companies and they don't have a security team. So if you're going to put Dwayne down for every single control, make sure that Dwayne can explain every single control. Make sure that Dwayne doesn't miss the interview, and make sure Dwayne is actually responsible for it. So making sure you assign those responsibilities is important. And again, I talked about the security responsibility matrix. The customer responsibility matrix is the buzzword, but they're tomatoes. And then treating the SSP as a static document. So big companies do this. You know, they'll write the SSP, they'll bring a consultant in to write a system security plan, and then there it goes with the business continuity plan collecting dust. They never open it up again. A lot of work to be put into this. And so when you get to the end of the SSP, you're going right into continuous monitoring mode. As soon as you get your certification, as soon as you self-attest, as soon as you do a self-assessment, you're immediately going into security continuous monitoring. And there are some big controls that need to be monitored on a weekly basis: risk assessment, vulnerability management. I talked about insufficient detail on how the controls are implemented. It's not enough to say that this control is implemented. If you inherit those controls from a cloud service provider, or if you're a large company and you're using another business unit to manage your TAC-A services for identity management, you need to really document how you inherit those controls, the relationship between you and the external service provider. And then the last thing I would say is not tailoring an organization to a specific environment for scoping. I see a lot of cutting and pasting. Templates are good, okay, but you got to make sure that you mature your policies and mature your SSP to your environment. And so that's where the scoping comes in. That's where you really need to have accountability for people, processes, technology that are accessing the data and where the data itself is living, and then the life cycle of the data. Who created it? Who owns it? And when does it come to end of life?
No, and that's fantastic. Now, so the one thing I'm going to say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think building out the SSP, in doing so, I think organizations are going to not just be able to document their policies and their procedures and their processes, but it's also going to be a good gap assessment as well, because they're going to see gaps that they're going to need to bridge before they move any further forward. So just based off of your experience, what's your advice for companies who are putting it together, everything? They're going through the self-assessment, they're putting together the SSP, they're finding these gaps, but they don't have the resources to fix them all at once. What would you say would be the best thing for them to do?
Yeah, I mean, so listen, one thing we don't have a lot of is time or money. And so that's a common problem with all companies, right? When you go through this SSP, when you do your self-assessment, and I like to see everything documented on a poem as I'm going. And so I've worked through this building a company from start, but I've also came in to manufacturing floors and I've done their assessments for them, the self-assessments for them. The easiest, most efficient way to do your gap analysis is document everything on the poem as you go. Everything that's broke, you document. That product, okay, that poem product is the building block for being able to prioritize and identify which gaps. Not all gaps are created equal, right? So you want to focus on vulnerabilities, non-compliance areas that pose the highest risk to your organization and the data that you handle, especially with FCI, CUI. Severity, likelihood, and regulatory. So the fuzzy map of DoD is pretty simple to figure out. You can look at the DoD assessment methodology. Some controls are worth 5 points, some controls are worth 3 points, and others are worth 1. You got to look at where the pain is going to hurt the most for you through doing a risk analysis, right? So when I get a poem and I do a gap analysis, I'm going to prioritize these poems not based off of when I found them, but based off of the severity of potential impact, the likelihood of exploitation, and regulatory contract obligations. You may not have a choice to do certain things at your own time. I think we're going to see more of those organization-defined parameters be pushed to us in Rev 3, but you will still have customer requirements, right? So you'll develop your remediation based off of that priority, right? Being able to list out and categorize between high, medium, and low. I talked about FIPS 199, and FIPS 199 tells us how to categorize high, medium, and low systems, but you should be categorizing high, medium, and low controls based off of your risk assessment. So within the security family for CMMC, you have the RA family. And I see a lot of companies don't know how to do risk assessment. Okay, they know how to identify a problem, but they don't know how to define the appropriate remediation and response. That your risk assessment, enterprise risk assessment plan out of the RA family should steer what items you remediate first in the poem after you get your gap analysis. I mean, you can go a few days probably without updating an administrative policy that the CEO has failed to sign, but you probably don't want to go a few days without remediating a high vulnerability that will impact a domain controller or your identity management system or something that could have a huge impact on confidentiality.
Excellent. Now, I want to be very respectful because we've got quite a few questions here. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the Q&A portion, just so we make sure we answer as many as we can. I know folks are in the chat answering questions as well, but I do have a few that we want to make sure that we're asking for everybody. So Eric has sent in a question. Is this also for SBIR Phase 2 contracts, which are firm fixed price?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, short answer is yes. Very good. James asks us, for clarification's sake, do we only need to protect the CUI data, or do we also need to apply the security controls to parts and products that are created using the data, which could theoretically be measured, inspected, or reverse engineered to extract the protected CUI data, like the specifications, which would be CTI?
So that's a loaded question. I'm going to try to break that down a little bit and see if I can answer it methodically here. So during the scoping process, I'm going to look at what kind of systems you have. Do you have security protected assets, which are producing SPI? Do you have CUI? Do you have operational technology? So it's all about the data. So products themselves, off a commercial product off the shelf, does not require CMMC certification, right? So if you go buy a Cisco appliance or a Fortinet appliance or Jupiter, any product that you buy off the shelf, they don't have to be certified, and the product itself does not need to be certified. What needs to be certified is the CMMC controls that need to be that are focusing on that product. So if you have a Fortinet that you're using for a firewall, that will be classified as a security protected asset, and it's producing security protected data. CTI in itself is a category of CUI, and so if it's producing CTI, depending on how it's scoped versus a CUI asset versus an operational specialized asset or an SPA asset, would determine the level of protection you need to put within your CMMC program. But the product itself does not require CMMC certification.
Excellent. And then someone did just ask if CTI was considered CUI. So the answer to that is yes.
Yes, controlled technical information absolutely is. So if you're building parts for a submarine and a warship in conforms with the contract, the diagrams will show how the sausage is made. That is CTI.
Now, Beth asked, is your SSP actually considered CUI, and does it need to be protected in your enclave?
Yeah, so listen, there's a lot of us in the CMMC AB that have been having this religious debate over the last 5 years. So you'll hear some people say it is, and you'll see some people say it's not. They're both right. It depends on what data is in the SSP. I have worked in environments where I did not allow any CUI data to go into the SSP, and if it got close to a judgment call, vulnerability data, IP addresses, I would redact that. The SSP does not have to be classified as CUI if it doesn't have CUI in it. It's just document. Now it is sensitive, right? You don't want to put it on your public facing internet so the world can see your SSP, okay? But it doesn't necessarily have to be classified as CUI. I will tell you that most organizations, okay, what we're doing, especially conducting assessments, I use a Chromebook that is in a secure enclave for the C3PLs, and so we keep everything in that environment, so there's no spillage and there's no risk of at all. But in many cases, if you don't put CUI in your SSP, and I recommend that approach because you're going to be working probably with a lot of stakeholders internally, externally, to get the framework documented. When it's complete, you may want to protect it at a higher level. The last thing I'll say about that is if you are supporting a customer or a prime see what their preference is. They may want you to classify it as CUI.
Excellent. And then Gail asked us, is it appropriate for a customer, defense or aerospace, to ask for a copy of a vendor's SSP?
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And so I have done work with different providers, Prevail and Kiteworks. And when I was working with Kiteworks at AT&T, I asked for their SOC 2 report and their SSP. I wanted to see how their structure was built and all the controls they had in place. It is absolutely okay to ask for that. If they don't give it to you, you may want to start doing some vendor searching.
So Pei asked, what does the shift to NIST 800-171 revision 3 look like for updating the SSP?
So I don't expect it to be a hard lift, right? So I again, this is a gap analysis. If Rev 3 comes out tomorrow, which I don't expect it to be out for a while, but if it comes out tomorrow, this is a gap analysis. Our current state versus our future state and fix in between. I think we're going to see some more organizationally defined parameters in Rev 3, and I think that's a good idea. I think DoD is going to say, hey, this is how often you scan, this is how often you do this. But you're just looking at a gap analysis. You're with your current state and where are you going? What's broken between? And so there'll be some areas where you're going to enhance certain controls. There'll be other areas where they're going to think they're going to remove controls. I see stuff like supply risk management being a new family going in Rev 3. So I don't expect it to be a hard lift, but it will be some changes to improve some of the weaknesses that we know of right now in Rev 2.
And then Dave asked, does the government have a resource to contact that would help with explaining what some of the 320 objectives are, since some are extremely difficult to know what they are wanting?
Yeah, so a couple of things about that. Contact Echelon, right? Reach out to one of our cyber advisors. So let's just talk about what that looks like first. I think that when you're starting this process, if you don't have a deep understanding of security, I really think it's a good idea to seek expert guidance and get a consultant to come in. The second thing is, a big family in CMMC is awareness and training, right? The DoD believes that a majority of the threat comes from insider threat, whether it's a government employee, whether it's a contractor doing something intentional or doing something accidental. The access is the same. But where I see the breakdown is folks are not trained. So you want to get somebody in your organization, send them through the RP course, send them through the CCP course, pair that with the engineer that's the expert, because CCAs will not be an expert on every piece of technology, but they will be an expert and understand security very well. So they can work with the engineer to say, well, show me how that group policy is configured, and I will tell you whether you're identifying all your users and whether you're monitoring your users and whether you're activating. So I do think it's going to be hard for any company to get through this if they're not going to have some trained CMMC personnel on their staff, or they're not going to use a consultant externally to do that, because this does require a lot of reading. So most CMMC experts spend 70% of their time reading NIST documents, keeping current with the Cyber AB and all DoD's posts, and attending a lot of webinars like this. It's a big overhaul. So if you don't have the time to put into the research and study and to know how, then you want to look for some help.
Will do. And then I obviously want to throw in the commercial here for Project Spectrum, just as you said, when you're looking for somebody who can give you advice, the Project Spectrum cyber advisors, this is what they do. I will attest, the cyber advisory team, they come from this world. They come from businesses and organizations that have gone through the CMMC compliance process. They come from the world of manufacturing, or they come from the business world where, again, they've worked for the smaller companies, because a lot of times when you go to those larger, those larger contractors, those larger companies, when you say, well, how do you deal with this? They say, well, you set your team of 14 people on it and they'll have it done in a day, versus the smaller companies where the team of 14 people is the entire company, and possibly even less. And you're talking about the fact that one person, like you said before, you could be identifying them as the person to speak to about all of these different controls. So it's, again, one of those things, they come from that world, and so they understand the challenges, and they are always there to help.
And Rick, just real
Good.
quick on that too. And I I can't emphasize it enough. If you're a contractor in the DIB, if you're a senior executive with your company, or or you're the senior security official, you really want to put your teeth in the final rule. I've read the final rule about 5 times, and every single time I get an aha. And so I am seeing right now in the industry a lot of folks that haven't read the final rule, and they're speaking and saying things that objectively they could rectify if they just read that final rule. Take time to 800-171 is not a hard document. It's not a long document. Read every single control and understand it. And I think that that's the most effective way to really prepare, is to read rather than skim, and wait for something on social media to pop up.
No, and that is the truth. And we always try to remind people, don't take social media as the only source of your information. Please do your due diligence. And again, as you're reading through those documents, if you're having any of those problems and you need to reach out to the Project Spectrum team, we have a great way for you to do it. I do want to just mention this really quickly. If you go to the Project Spectrum website, and down the right-hand bottom corner of the site, there's a little question mark. You click on that, and it opens up a form that you can fill out and you could submit, and that goes right to the Project Spectrum team, whether it's something technical about the site or whether it's something about cybersecurity that you have a question about. We are always here to help you. So that is a quick and easy way to get hold of us. Go to projectspectrum.io, click on the question mark in the bottom hand right corner, and that will give you that form that you could submit, and then you'll get an answer. Eleanor asked, you said that SSP was the same as policies, but I have tons of separate policy documents. I thought SSP has the diagram and overview, but not each individual policy. Please advise.
No. So what I said was the system security plan is like a policy statement. In the commercial world, they don't have SSPs. They do have a security policy. At the state levels, they have security policies. Those security policies mimic an SSP. They define all their control families, all their implementation families. So an SSP is a separate document that is required by DFARS requirements that you have. What I've said is that the SSP by itself is not enough. Okay, there are 3 controls that we have: technical controls, administrative controls, and physical controls. Our administrative controls come by way of security policies. And so when I look at the SSP, I probably am expecting to see your identity management policy, your business continuity policy, your risk assessment policy. So I do recommend about 14 security policies that will at least cover all the families in addition to the SSP. But make no mistake about it, for informality purposes, the system security plan is a large policy that collectively describes the operational controls within your environment, to include some other goodies like system boundaries and network diagrams and things of that nature.
And then we've talked about, of course, SSPs and POAMs, and people want to know, are there templates, are there resources, are there frameworks that companies can access to help build out these documents?
Yeah, so we have, and I think Rick will get somebody, one of the CAs can put that in the link for you, but we do have an arsenal of templates. Our CAs are updating templates on a regular basis to reflect the requirements specifically for CMMC. We have templates down to the standard operating procedure level. We have templates for how to do change management, maintenance, run CAB advisory boards, and we can give you a template for the system security plan, data inventory, and also a POEM. All you got to do is come to Echelon and ask, and we can provide you. But again, I emphasize, you got to massage the template to fit your environment. It's not a silver bullet until it has your company all through it and all over it.
Right, and that is the one thing that everybody needs to keep in mind. And another thing that I want to address, that one question we always get at Project Spectrum is, will you write my SSP for me? Will you write my POAM for me? And they just don't understand. Dwayne, explain this to them in language that they'll understand, why that is such a bad idea to have somebody who doesn't know your environment to write these documents.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. So what we do now, what our practice is now, we will work with clients and help them understand what the control is. I like them to write in exactly how they think they're implementing the controls and fire questions at them. They have to be responsible. You have to be responsible for owning your environment, understanding your controls. When it comes to an assessment, the assessor is going to want to speak to the control owner. They won't come to an Echelon cyber advisor. And if there's indication that you have not written your SSP and you can't explain it, I've done this with members of senior management during assessments. I've asked senior management to explain to me the personnel security, the onboarding process, and they haven't even read their policy. They haven't even read the SSP. So it's like riding a bike. You want to do it yourself so you know how to do it. You get away from having somebody do the work that you have to be responsible for, because any good consultant will charge you a lot of money and write an SSP for you. They shouldn't be doing that. But when they do that, understand that they don't have any accountability and they're not responsible for your assessment. You are.
Right. And that's the other thing. If somebody else were to write an SSP for you, say they're just pulling language that they used for some other company, you would then be responsible for what they wrote, correct?
Absolutely. So, and that's the same thing for MSPs. That's the same thing for cloud service providers. The final rule is very clear that the organization seeking certification, you can delegate responsibility or authority. You can delegate, you can inherit controls, but you are still responsible for what goes on at SSP. I expect over the next year, you're going to see DOJ to have more false claim acts. False claim is about two or three things, right? You reporting a score that you didn't have, you writing in an SSP something that you didn't do, and you not managing the poems correctly, because what they're looking at is DoD is giving you a contract, they're giving you money, your prime is giving you money based off of what you say that you're doing, and if you haven't done it, that they're looking at going back in time to see the period of performance, how many contracts you had, and how long has it been since you've been getting money from the DoD but haven't been putting those controls in. And that's the definition of the False Claim Act.
Right. And so that's again perfect reason why you need to make sure that you are being as involved in this process as possible. So Dwayne, we are coming up at the top of the hour and we're just about out of time here. We apologize if there are any questions that didn't get answered, but we'll make sure that we're getting you answers offline. I just want to ask one final question of you. What would you say the next steps should be for companies to take after this webinar, if they're, again, looking to start developing their SSP?
So I think the first thing they should do is sit down and identify their business requirements. Business should drive what you're going to do. I don't recommend that you start developing a CMMC enclave maturity level 2. Understand what your business requirements are. Socialize with senior management. Make sure they understand. Do a data inventory. If what data do you have today? What data do you have? And then start identifying those applicable controls that you need for your environment. Doing a self-assessment is a great way to understand where you need to start at. If you have a cybersecurity program in place, do a self-assessment. If you don't, do a data inventory and determine what are your contract requirements and where you need to be at tomorrow.
And always want to remind people that that self-assessment tool is available on projectspectrum.io. Sign up for your account, no cost, does not cost you a dime, does not cost you a penny, only costs you the time to fill out the information and start, and then you can get to that self-assessment and you can, again, get yourself to that baseline to see where you're starting and where it is that you need to go and how you're going to need to get there. So, Dwayne, we want to thank you so much for all of the information you shared today. This was absolutely fantastic. And, again, want to make sure that, you and I were talking offline beforehand. Want to make sure that we do this again, because, again, I think these are topics that, to somebody who is well versed in cybersecurity, an SSP and a POAM, it's like breathing. They don't do breathing. It just happens. But for somebody who's really starting out on their cybersecurity journey, or they're very early into it, or like we said, they've achieved level 1, but now they want to go to level 2. There are a lot of things that they're going to need some help with, and that's why we're glad we have experts like you to help.
Well, listen, I'll just close with this. I think it was Lyndon Johnson that said that you can do almost anything with a team, but you can do nothing by yourself. And so you're going to have to work as a team within your company. You're going to have to bring consultants in, and that's the yellow brick road to success.
Well, and we are happy to help you with all of that here at Project Spectrum. Dwayne, again, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate everything that you shared. I am going to end today just sharing my screen once again and just letting people know that, again, if you are looking to connect with Project Spectrum, we do highly recommend that you do so. We have training webinars that we offer every month. So be sure to watch out for our social media sites. Be sure to watch out for email. Be sure to watch our website. We are going to be announcing those all the time. So join us for our future training webinars. ProjectSpectrum.io is our website. We've often been asked, why are you not .gov? Why are you .io? We addressed that in a previous webinar, but we'll be happy to explain that one for you. But again, go to our website. Support@ProjectSpectrum.io is a way to email us if you want to email us. But again, I highly recommend using that question mark at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen of the Project Spectrum website. That's going to get you to us faster than an email. And then we have our social media sites. Again, you can find us on LinkedIn, and you can find us on YouTube, where this video is going to end up posted later on. So make sure you are joining us at any possible chance and letting us help you as you go through your cybersecurity journey. So again, thank you so much to Dwayne Hodges. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for the Project Spectrum team who was here answering questions in the chat. Thank you to Mark, our great communications guy who helped put all of this together. I always like to give Mark Chisholm a shout out. Richard Rowe, the director of Project Spectrum, thank you so much for all of your support. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us. We look forward to being with you again next month for our next training webinars on our next cyber circuits. So for all of the Project Spectrum team, this is Rick from Move America saying thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure. We wish you the best of success on your cybersecurity journey, and have a great rest of the day.